So, Jesus heals a woman on the Sabbath, and the leader of the synagogue goes apoplectic, using the rules of the Sabbath to try to discredit Jesus, regardless of the good he has done. His rant has less to do with the Sabbath, though, than with asserting power and control. Understandably, he felt that he might lose control of his congregation and would probably be left with diminished power as a result. On the other hand, you can understand. This is the way we do things here. Come back on Monday. We have our rules. It's not so much to ask. But he ignored the benefit to the woman and employed a literal, self-serving interpretation of the law in order to try to control Jesus and to protect his own institution. This foreshadows grievous, even deadly uses of power for control, as in the persecution of Christians in the book of Acts. And today, all over the world, we see governments resorting to the use of power for control as global interdependence gives way to authoritarian regimes. So, where do we fit in as faithful followers of Jesus? We try to live a good life, to be bearers of hope in a scary world, but it can be exhausting. What is the key to keeping our gaze firmly fixed on the good news, to not be wearied by the chances and changes of this life? I think it has to do with balance, and that has to do with keeping some kind of Sabbath. Christians and Jews also have long struggled over how best to do that. In 1888, that's almost 150 years ago, the Lambeth Conference of Anglican bishops had this to say, an opinion which has not, to my knowledge, been superseded. They said that the principle of religious observation of one day in seven is of divine and primeval obligation, and was afterwards embodied in the fourth commandment. The observance of the Lord's Day as a day of rest, of worship, and of religious teaching has been a priceless blessing in all Christian lands in which it has been maintained. The growing license in its observance threatens a grave change in its sacred and beneficent character. The increasing practice on the part of some of the wealthy and leisurely classes of making the day a day of secular amusement is most strongly to be deprecated. The most careful regard should be had to the danger of any encroachment upon the rest which on this day is the right of servants as well as their masters, 150 years ago, and of the working classes as well as their employers. So, Jesus or the bishops? Looking back, it seems that the bishop's concern was really one of social justice, that household servants and workers be afforded the same rest given people who could afford not to work 7 days a week. But it also goes to the nature of Sabbath itself, the idea that God has priority over everything else, and we owe both God and ourselves and all who are employed this one day of rest and reflection. They both come down to a question of justice, of what it means to honor the dignity of every human being. That was what Jesus was doing when he healed the woman on the Sabbath. Ought not this woman, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day? In Jesus' time, women were very much second-class citizens. It may be that he was the first person to really see her as a child of God, worthy of healing. For many years, the logo of Episcopal Church women was a woman standing tall with arms upraised in praise to God. It was an image that came from this text, from the idea that God's healing power sets us free from oppression as well as physical bondage. In the gospel lesson, Jesus argues with his opponents who criticize him for healing on a Sabbath. Jesus counters that in healing the woman, he's actually setting her free from bondage to Satan. And just as anyone would untie an animal to show it compassion, how much more appropriate is it to loose someone from the powers that work against human health, wholeness, and freedom? Surely we would all agree. After all, showing compassion and working for the dignity of every human being is the right thing to do every day of the week. We applaud Jesus' opposition to a legalistic view of the Sabbath. We applaud him and then we turn the page, thankful that we're not weighed down by a false piety that stands in the way of the pursuit of justice. And this may be where we get into trouble. Are we too quick to move along, dismissing the whole issue of Sabbath and its deeper implications? In 1888, the Anglican bishops seemed to think that God does not recommend a Sabbath, but commands it. In Jesus, we're set free from a legalistic interpretation of Sabbath, but what are we set free for? I read the other day that the American Productivity Index has gone down. But in a society where anxiety and addiction are huge issues, is that necessarily a bad thing? Might we not have a day that's free not only from work, but from accumulating more things? Does every minute of our children's time need to be structured so that they never miss a chance to compete, to excel, to keep up, to add an activity? What price do we pay in never designating one day in 7, any day, as a day of Sabbath rest? What is it about this idea that's so basic that it was one of the commandments that Moses received on Mount Sinai? Keeping some kind of Sabbath in our week leaves us free for rest. We need it. We all need it. Adults, children, executives, bus drivers, programmers, project managers, students, teachers, nurses, stay-at-home moms, and fathers. We are mortal, and mortals are creatures that need to stop, replenish, and rest. Even Jesus took time off from his healing and preaching to be alone with God. This rest is a justice issue because we need an economy in which people can make a living wage so that no one needs to work every day of the week in order to make ends meet or provide for the needs of their family. We're free to remember who created us and who holds us in life. Sabbath reminds us that God is God, and we can stop trying to take that role. We can rest worshiping the one God and learning about the real God. And Sabbath need not just be on Sunday. It's possible to create Sabbath pockets every day by taking a little time to slow down, to collect ourselves, and to remember what's really important. We're free to immerse ourselves in eternity and forget the day-to-day cares that occupy most of our waking hours and sometimes wake us up at 3 a.m. Sabbath gives us a time and a place in which we produce nothing but reflection and praise, where we are valued not because of what we make, do, earn, deserve, know, contribute, or achieve, but because we are created and loved by God. If, as our reading from Hebrews states, our God is a consuming fire, then worship and reflection give us a place where all that seems so needful during the rest of the week can be burned away, and we can rest simply and wholly in the presence of God. The woman Jesus healed on the Sabbath must have experienced all this in gaining her freedom. She experienced rest from the terrible physical burden of living with her deformity. She experienced reliance on God and the reminder that God alone has the power to heal. And she experienced true worship in praise for what God had done, not what she had accomplished. And what about us? How does each of us need to be set free? And how shall we keep Sabbath in our own days? Amen.